Welcome to Ritual Scale Modelling. This is part 3 of Revell's Tornado IDS scale 1 to 48. In part 2, I built up the fuselage and placed on the wings. So in part 3, I'm going to be placing on the tail and working on the engines. So let's jump into this and see how I get on. Starting off from exactly where I left off in part 2, I am now placing on, assembling the back part of the fuselage that's going to be placed on top of the aircraft, and the mechanism that's going to be holding the tail. So before I attach it, I'm going to be painting a few things, and I'm using 34 grey and 301 white silk, 80% of the grey, 20% of the white, and this is for all the inner parts of the aircraft. So this is the air brakes here, so it's the inside of the air brakes. Now only do this if you're going to be having them on show. Obviously if you're having them closed, there's no point in doing it. It's a straightforward assembly. They just go on the edge of the fuselage. Lining it up can be a little bit tricky, I suppose, getting it 100% straight, but there is little guidelines for you to push onto. Once it's ready to go on, it just simply sits on top. There is no need for any adjustments, it just slots straight in. I did use a couple of clamps to hold it, but apart from that, everything went on okay. Next is the air intakes. To build these up, be careful of the alignment when you're putting these side panels in. They will line up to the fuselage that I just placed on. They have to go at the side and not on top. I've seen people before trying to line them up on top of the air vent, or air intake, I should say, and they don't go like that. They won't fit. If you're unsure, study some pictures and you'll be able to tell how they go. Just doing the same for the opposite side. And try fitting it first, making sure I have the proper angle. They're a bit tricky, they're an awkward shape, so they're a bit uncomfortable in the hand trying to place them on. Next to go on are the guard plates for the wings. While you're placing these on, be mindful where you placing the cement. You obviously don't want the cement to go anywhere onto the wings and this impede the movement if you're wanting the movement action to take place. The underside and the top side have the same parts on it, so once you're comfortable fitting one, you shouldn't have a problem with all the rest of the other three. As you can see, I'm using a couple of clamps here. That's just to make sure that the drilling edge is going to close, but always check the movement before you're satisfied with it. Onto some engine prep, and then using Revell Aquacolor 09 Anthracite Black for the inner part of the engines. So all 4 sections of the inner are painted in this colour. I'm also going to paint the nose cone, so that's Revell Aquacolor 06 Tar Black for this, and just painting this in preparation for when the nose cone goes on. The rotor blades are painted in 19mm aluminium. So I wouldn't worry so much if you don't have the colour of choice for your metal work, especially for these rotor blades. You're only going to get to see glimpses of them anyway, so it doesn't matter if you do them in silver, aluminium, steel, whatever you're doing them in. The housing is also painted in aluminium, but the inside is painted in black. Just pick any blacks you want really, all depending on how you display the models, whether you'll actually see the inside of this. But as a general rule, you won't see the inside of this housing, so effectively you can leave it unpainted. The actual engine cowling I'm painting in Revell Aquacolor 91 steel, and that's 95%, mixed in with 95 bronze, 5%. Now you can mix it with red paint as well, if you wish, but this just happens to be a colour that I've had left over from a previous build, and it works fine with that as well, so I've decided to use this mixture. The building of the engine itself is very simple. It's just your 2 halves getting moulded together, and that's how it's done all the way down the line from there to the actual engine itself. You can put the housing on now, or you can place it on afterwards. It's entirely up to you how you want to approach it. I just so happen to put it on now. Before you place in the engine, however, you have to place in the brackets that are going to hold the rear wings, or the tail wings, whatever you call them. So make sure you've got the bracket in, and there's a little recess point for them just to sit in. If you want movement, make sure no cement goes near them. To assemble the rotor blades, they just stack up on each other, so there's one on each side, and then they just slot in on the ends of the engine. As I said, the engine was just two halves put together, and last to go on is the actual exhaust port, and that's all there is to making up the engine. Now, I did have a tiny amount of gapping issues, nothing major, just hairline really. I think that stems from the problem from the part 2 of the video when I had to fill in a little gap, but there was nothing major. Back to the nose cone, and I'm using liquid gravity here to add weight to the nose cone. Now the instruction says around about 40 grams, but I will just fill it up almost to the brim on it anyway. I then add a little layer of super glue at the top before placing in some putty, and that just stops it from all coming out. It's very thin filings of metal, this liquid gravity, and it can go everywhere if it gets on your bench, so just be careful if you ever do use it. So now it's on to the tail, and first of all I'm having to make up the signal probes and that at the back, and this is just one solid bar that you have to cement together, and I'm painting in 91 steel 10% and 07 black gloss 90%. You can paint this afterwards, of course, but it's such a small part, I think it's better to paint it now. And then there's a little area that you have to paint in. It's 91 steel and 95 bronze mix that I'm using here. It's just a little tiny bit. You can just use plain silver or aluminium as well, of course. It's back to the tail, and first of all I'm just placing the bar in. This fits quite snugly along its line. You shouldn't have any problem lining it up. And then I simply cement the two halves of the tail together. You may have to press down a little bit firmly where the bar is. That's just to make sure it's close. Clamping at the end will help as well, of course. And it's time to put on the cone, and that just pushes on. There's a little location marks for you to do so. It's back to the tail, and this is the rudder section of the tail, and it's just two halves sandwiched together. There is a lower half which I've already painted, and I painted this in Revell Aqua 91 steel. There's also two tiny little clear parts that I put on, but they're so small and the camera didn't pick them up so well, so I haven't really shown them, but they just go on the top of the tail. But first of all, it's time to put on the rudder. So while the tail is drying, I'm just going to be assembling the wings as well. So the two halves went together very easily, lined up quite well, and before that done, I can now place on the tail, and that just slopes on the back. There's a little location marks, a little run as such, that goes up to the contact point, so just slide it in and it should line up quite well. And then once that's in, the bottom part of the rudder can go in. That just pushes on. Now the instructions say place it onto the wing beforehand, but after a bit of dry fitting, I thought it better to put it on once the tail is in place. However, I did discover there was a bit of a gap as well with this, so I placed some filler onto it before refitting it, and this enables me to get into the gap without having to touch anything else. So it acts as a bonding agent as well as a filler. This sprue glue stuff that I use as a filler, and for this instance it works very well because it covers the gap and it will, as I say, bond the part together as well. A little bit more prep work again. So it's a Revell 371 light grey, and this is for the doors or the air brakes. So that's the inside of them. There's a couple of little bits to make up. There's the inner bracket mechanism, which goes onto the door, and the piston arm, which is 301Y silk. The actual piston itself is painted in paint mix 91 steel 95 and 95 bronze 5% mix. It's now time to put on the flaps for the back of the aircraft. Depending on how you're going to be displaying it will dictate greatly which ones you put on here. But first of all, the bar is that I'm placing on now is the same bar throughout. So you may have noticed while I was doing that it was missing a rear wing. That is because it snapped off while I was handling the model. It's a very small bar that holds it together, and I just put too much pressure on it and it snapped off. So obviously I'm going to have to fix that. So at the moment I'm just tidying up the contact points, and then I'll just re-drill the hole using my pin drive. And I'm simply just going to place a cocktail stick in the hole, and this is going to act as my new support rod. Now luckily I was able to get the engine out. I hadn't actually cemented it in at this point because I didn't know how much manoeuvring I was needing to do before other parts of the manifold went on. So that worked out quite well. So I'm just lining up the cocktail stick to see how much I have to cut off. And then I'll simply add a little bit of super glue into it. Then once it's in, I'll put another cross piece on inside, and that will just hold the wing into place. And this is actually where I'm going to end part 3, because I'll take a little while for this to set until I'm happy with it, I think. So it's a good place to end it. In part 4, I'll carry on with the some more work on the flaps, and start thinking about the weapon system and the canopy. But for now, if you haven't done so already, why don't you check out the channel for my other builds, particularly for the this series as well, if you haven't done so already. There you can see the little crossbeam. If you've got any suggestions, please feel free to leave them. But most importantly, subscribe to the channel and you'll be notified of updates, and hit that like button as well. So thank you all very much for watching. Bye bye.